Jonathan McLean joined Cases as Chief Executive Officer in September of 2022. He has extensive experience delivering, managing, and leading direct service programs, including clinical and youth programs. Prior to joining Cases, he was Vice President of the Residential and Youth Justice Service at SCO, Family of Services, providing leadership, vision, and direct operational oversight for a diverse program portfolio, including residential treatment, transitional housing, and jail and community-based programming implemented by more than 600 staff. At SCO, Jonathan has led and co-led DEIB work, engaged in an array of organizational transformation initiatives, and worked closely with the government partners, including the New York State Office of Children and Family Services, New York State Education Department, New York City Administration of Children's Services, New York City Division of Youth and Community Development, New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and the New York City Department of Correction. Prior to joining SCO, he worked in a variety of direct service and leadership roles at the Jewish Board and the Center for Urban Community Services. Jonathan holds a BSW from Adelphi University and an MSW from Hunter College Silberman School of Social Work and is an LCSW. Can we please welcome Jonathan McLean?
How excited I am to get up here and speak. But I got to start out, and I have been making a habit of doing this whenever I get an opportunity to speak. I want to say first and foremost, I am a black man. Born and raised, I don't care what title I hold, what letters, come behind my name, came in this world a black man, and I will leave this world a black man. And it is really critical for me to frame that, particularly in this day and time, given the things that we are all dealing with at so many different levels. How many folks in here have heard of Cases? Wow, I like that. I like that. So I'm going to tell you, we do a lot of wonderful work in this city. We have sites in every borough with the exception of Staten Island. We do critical work in the criminal legal system sector, and you'll hear me say that term. I do not use the term criminal justice system because we are in the habit of using accurate terms. We want to accurately describe the systems that we work in. And frankly, we don't feel that there's anything just about that system, so we're going to call it the criminal legal system. We provide a variety of services, alternatives to incarceration, because frankly, we believe poverty, substance use, mental health issues, homelessness, these are conditions, they're not crimes. We don't think people should be punished for living with certain conditions. So we fight every day to ensure that people don't have to have those things addressed in jails and prisons. We believe that people should be in the community and get the services they need with their families and in the communities that they serve, because there is no jail and prison in this country that is going to provide you with the kind of services that you need to make you a whole person. And frankly, we think no person, no matter who you are, should be defined by the worst day in your life, right? Everyone is much more than their worst experiences. Everyone is much more than the worst part of themselves. And we believe that people who come out of those systems should have every opportunity to be the best person that they can be and the best version of themselves. So we do a ton of work. We've got 9 ACT teams. How many people have heard of ACT, Assertive Community Treatment? We're probably the biggest provider of ACT services, one of the biggest providers in the city. We have 7 IMT teams, intensive mobile treatment. So we do a ton of work in the community where we take the walls off the clinics and we take the services to people who need them in vivo, right? So if you're someone who is living in a shelter or living under a bridge and you need these services, we are bringing these services to you. We've got the largest supervised release program in the city. We do Manhattan supervised release. So we do whatever we can to keep people who are in the pretrial process out of jails and prisons, because the fact of the matter is, innocent until proven guilty. If you're charged with a crime, it is very difficult to fight your case and work and go to school and support your family in a jail cell on Rikers Island. So we work ostensibly hard to ensure that people can fight their cases in the community. And Manhattan is has the biggest flow, so we do the most work there. And then we do a ton of work in the youth space, right? We have a division that's specifically devoted to young people, our education and career enrichment. We proctor the GED. We have a phenomenal program called ACES. I hope you hear more about it because we're going to be expanding. That is under the purview of ACS. It is our assertive community engagement program specifically for young people who are on the precipice of getting caught up in the criminal legal system. So that's who we work with in our ACES program. And there's a number of other things that we do. Again, we're a pretty large agency. We have over 600 staff. We've got an operating budget of close to 80 million. So we do a lot of concerted work in the city. I like to say we do God's work. And I'm going to say this to you because I want to be clear about this. We serve everyone. Our doors are open to anyone in the city who needs the service, but I am absolutely unequivocally clear of who our constituents are. And 95%, maybe 97% of the people we serve are Black and brown. They come from underinvested and marginalized communities, and they are the people that many people do not want to work with. And I think as you all do this work, and probably preaching to the choir with this, know who your constituents are, know who you serve. So while we will serve anyone, we know who we serve. The other thing that's important to mention is that I actually work in an organization that is still committed to engaging in anti-racist organizational transformation. Like many organizations in the city prior, I think there's a timeline for a lot of stuff, pre-George Floyd murder, post-George Floyd murder. And like many organizations in the city, we were no different. A lot of Black and brown people working on the front lines, some Black and brown people in middle management, no Black and brown people in the leadership, and no Black and brown people on the board of trustees. And even before I got to the organization and throughout the time that I have been here, we have been committed to transforming our organization into an organization that is equitable, that affirms diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just want to speak to what Mary said this morning about welcoming everybody and the value of supporting people being their authentic selves. And I want to say this work is important to us. DEIB is not a curse word, it's important to me. I am a product of DEIB, not because someone gave me something, because I'm gonna tell you everything I got I had to fight for, but because DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, opened up doors that would never have been opened up for me and gave me the opportunity to get in the arena and show what I can do. And if anybody tries to tell you that it's anything different than that, it's a lie, right? I'm not a religious person, but the devil is a lie. It's a lie. The fact of the matter it is about opening doors for you to be able to show the world what you can do, because without it, there are doors that are closed. So it's beautiful to be in a company of so many social workers, so many people committed to social justice, so many people doing this phenomenal work, so many people in this wonderful profession, and so much diversity, equity in this room. I want to say that having diversity and equity isn't an extra thing that you do. It isn't an aside from the work, it is the work. You cannot do this work in a holistic, full way without the diverse perspectives and ideas and experiences that you have in rooms like this. It's critically important. If you want to do this work effectively, you've got to have a big tent philosophy. And I want to say that's what we have been striving to do at Cases. It has been a work in progress. We have done everything we can to lean into those principles. We've rebranded. We are working hard, and we are making considerable progress. But I want to say to you that our goal isn't to be the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization in the city. Our goal is to just be the best version of ourselves. And I think that is the goal for any of us. You can never be the most of anything. All you can do is to be the best version of yourself. And that is the constant journey that we are on. So I'm very proud to lead that organization and do the work that we're doing, which is a battle every day. And I want to talk a little bit about my journey into social work and why this work is so important, and start with social justice, right? You cannot have social justice without injustice, right? So where there is injustice, there is social justice. And I want to say that until I was in my 30s, I didn't even know what social work was. But I'm going to tell you where it started for me, right? I grew up not too far from here. In 1986, the summer of 1986, I turned 16 years old. In late January of 1987, I was living in the housing projects down by Myrtle Avenue. I pulled out a gun and I shot and killed another 16-year-old. By February of 1987, I was sitting on Rikers Island and I was charged with murder in the second degree. A year and a half after that, I had been gone to trial. I had been convicted. I wasn't convicted of murder. I was acquitted of murder, but I was convicted of manslaughter in the first degree, and I was given a 24-year sentence. Now, I want to tell you something about that time, right? Because people say to me, man, you went to prison and, like you were in jail and, look at where you're at now. And would it have mattered? Because you didn't have all of the alternative to incarceration programs that you had back then. This was the 80s. When I pulled that trigger, ATI would not have mattered. An alternative to incarceration would not have mattered, right? Because at that point, that intervention would not have worked. But I want to say this and be really clear about this, right? The intervention might not work when you get it. That intervention might not be the right intervention at the time, but the right intervention is always the right time. It's always the right thing, right? So at that particular point in time, there would not have been an intervention that would have worked. But there were certainly intercepts before that where an intervention would have mattered, right? Like when I was 13 or 14 and I watched my father descend into the hellhole of crack addiction. And I was just talking to a gentleman over here, right? Because I grew up in Brownsville, Clinton Hill, in this order: Brownsville, Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, and then Bed-Stuy. Living in Clinton Hill, I remember walking to my door and seeing an eviction notice because one member of that two-family household could not keep up. And I remember being evicted, and I remember moving into my aunt's two-bedroom apartment, me, my mother, and my siblings, 6 of us in one bedroom, and my mother sleeping in the living room, trying to find a way. So, but there were no interventions at that point. An intervention might have mattered because that was the intercept that was important, right? So I find myself on Rikers Island in October '88, convicted, sentenced, given 24 years, 17 going on 18, right? Because this was before my 18th birthday. And really struggling to try to hold it together. I had lost everything. All of the things that happen to young people, your parents try to tell you about your friends, it all began to happen. People began to abandon me. My girlfriend was 3 months pregnant with my first child. I had a mother that was struggling to hold my 2 siblings up and hold me up, but was drowning, and I had nothing else. And I was about as alone as I had ever been in my life. And I'm going to tell you something. I didn't know what social work was, but when I look back in retrospect, I did not understand what a suicidal ideation was, but I can tell you, sitting on Rikers Island, the way I felt, I could not see light. There was no future. There was nothing. 17 years old, 24-year prison sentence, there's no way I was able to wrap my head around that. And all I saw was darkness. And I have to tell you, I don't know how I made it through that. The other thing I'll tell you is that I was on Rikers Island at a time where there was nothing but a sea of black and brown kids. And this is a really interesting piece of it. We were kids that had passed that point, right? And I don't want to minimize the fact that I took a life. I should have gone to prison, certainly should have. But again, our lives play out in the context, right? And there were a lot of kids like me from Brownsville, Bed-Stuy, Fort Greene, Bronx, South Bronx, Jamaica, Queens, bursting out of the seams of Rikers Island. I heard Justina talk about Rikers Island, where mass incarceration was at its peak. And here's the interesting thing about this, right? Social workers, 16 and 17-year-old kids who have not developed their capacity to think as adults. That executive functioning wasn't there. Killing each other, right? In the daytime, cutting each other, stabbing each other. And at night, sitting in our cells, trading comic books, talking about Captain America and Spider-Man under our cell doors. Because we were still children. So go upstate in 1988, right before my 18th birthday, get sent to Elmira Correctional Facility. I got this 24-year sentence. Start this journey. And this is the power of social work that I didn't understand, right? I begin this journey, that disaffected kid, struggling with my conditions. And here are the unsung heroes, and here are the connections. If anyone ever tells you, it's easy to sit here today for people to say, and sometimes you hear people kind of think that, well, you made it, prison made you better. There is nothing edifying or affirming about a jail or a prison. And here is what gets you through this, and this is why social work and social justice is so important. When I got upstate, I was angry, I was at the lowest point. They made me go to school because I was so young, I had to go to school. I happened to luck up and take my GED test, right? Only because I didn't want to be in school. I felt like I was in a prison, and I just convinced the teacher and the principal to let me take it as soon as I got upstate, and I happened to pass it. And I'll never forget, at this time, there were a lot of colleges in the prison. They would have satellite programs in the prison. And I remember one of the guys in one of the units like, yo, you should go to college. I was like, absolutely not. But I will tell you, had I not taken that test, and this is an ode to the idea that you can sometimes do the wrong thing for the right reason, I don't think anything else that happened after that would have been possible. So that was the first beginning. I spent about a year and a half up there, and I got shipped down to a facility another maximum facility prison called Greenhaven Correctional Facility. This was 1990, I was 18 years old. And it is a transformative period in my life. I hear people talking about Yale, Harvard. That was my Yale and my Harvard, although I didn't know it when I went there. And I never forget, when I got to the facility, you have to program. You got a program in the morning, you got a program in the afternoon. So I go to the program committee, and I was looking through the list, and they had this program called Black Studies. I'm like, what's that? So the woman who was describing the program said, oh, it's a program where the inmates teach you Black Studies. Light went right on. Bingo. But again, doing the right thing for the wrong reason. I didn't take Black Studies because I cared about Black Studies. I took Black Studies because I had internalized that when you work with people who look like you, they're not going to take it any serious. They're not going to take it seriously. So in my mind, I'm like, man, he's going to be, inmates, cats. I'm going to go up there, I'm going to sign the book, and I'm going to hit the yard. Wow. That ain't work like that. So I get up to this room, building 12. Some of you who've been there know what that is. Go in there, walk into this classroom, no bigger than maybe this section here. And I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember the old Jet magazines and Essence magazines. Every section of the wall covered with pictures of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. And I walk into this room and I see these men, old timers I would call them, but they couldn't have been no more than their 30s or 40s, standing up reciting the African pledge. It blew me away. If I had any notion that I was gonna walk in there and sign out, those men, right, disabused me of that notion immediately. And this was the beginning of me, because this was the first time I had been in a situation, other than with my father, where I had ran into men whose only condition for me was wanting to see me not end up like them. This is my first experience with social work. Men who had fallen off the cliff. Many of these men had life, right? Black men, Latino men. But they saw me, and they saw themselves in me, and they did not want me and other young men like me to end up like them. So they began to do the work. They began to intervene. They began to help me understand that although you did something in a community that is irreparable, you've taken a life, you've harmed your community, you did not do that outside of a context. The first time in my life, I began to get an analysis of my situation, right? Not only have I started to get history, but you had these men changed my life, radically changed my life. And actually, Eddie, we used to call him Kabaka, ran a program here at Medgar for many years and continued to do the work that he was doing in there. And I wasn't the only one. There were many young Black and brown men whose lives he transformed. So that was an intervention that I needed, right? Talk about social work and social justice. But I get out in 2003. And the one thing I do want to share about this is where the work, the social justice and the social work. I used to work in the school area and a facility I was in. And every time I worked there for years, right? I was a teacher's aide. And every time I got hit at the board, I used to feel like you never see yourself the way people see you. I used to feel like I was walking up the stairs to the school area that Monday, because you would get your paper on Friday, with my head in my hand. But there were a couple of teachers, 2 teachers that took a notice to me, and they said, when you get close to getting out, we'll help you. And finally in 2003, when that time came, They said, we want to connect you to somebody because I never forget this teacher saying this to me. Every time you come up, you hold your head up high and you keep your shoulders straight and you just keep doing the work. So they say to me, we have a friend who's a social worker. His name is Winslow Drummond. When you get out, I want you to connect with him, and he's going to help you. I don't have anything to lose. I went in as a kid 16 years earlier. Coming out as a almost 33-year-old man, I just need to find a way. So I connect with Winslow. He says to me, listen, if you make a decision to go back to school, because I had started school in there, they ended up taking the school, so I had like a 2-year degree, I'll help you. You should think about social work. I don't know what social work is. I don't even have a clue about that, but I'm going to do whatever. So get out. He helps me get into school at Delphi University, but I'm more interested in him helping me get a job. So I'm like, okay, so how are we going to do this thing with the job? He said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you these 4 or 5 organizations, and this is as true as night and day, and I want you to construct this work history. I'm looking at what I'm writing. I'm like, okay, I'm locked up. What are we doing here? So he creates this 5 or 6 year work history, right, of these organizations that have closed down. He said, you're going to memorize that, and then when you walk into one of these places, you're going to tell them that's where you work. Now, here I am. Listen, I gotta step back when I say this. I have done a lot of terrible things. I had done a lot of terrible things. I had been amongst people that have done terrible things. I was scared to death. I could not tell you. My mouth dropped when I'm like, this is your way? I'm thinking, you trying to get me to go back to jail. And he had to convince me that this was the way, right? So he knew somebody. I go to the Center for Urban Community Services. He ended up getting me an interview. I was shaking. I was so scared. And I'll never forget this. I went in for the interview. I had memorized this stuff, spent 15 minutes talking about the job and 30 minutes talking about the Yankees, and I got the job. And it blew me away because I was still going to parole downtown Brooklyn. I had 6 years of parole. I got this job. I was telling somebody this the other day. I remember I got my first paycheck. It was a lot of money. I was making $31,000 a year. My first ever real paycheck, I got like $900. I remember I went in the bathroom and I opened it up and I looked at it and I wished I would have been able to plaque it, but I needed the money, so there's no way I was going to be able to plaque it. So I did that for a couple of years, but of course I lied on my application. I said I did not have a conviction history, right? And it was exhilarating to be working out in the community, right? And to do this, and I would never recommend anyone do that today, but I have no regrets about doing it because I needed to find a way. And what Winslow did for me was find a way because he knew what I was up against. There was nobody that was going to hire a black man with a violent felony history with no work experience. So I got my foot in the door. But that became more perilous because now, at the time, CUCS, I know some of you heard of that agency, was a little smaller, and I was actually doing well, but every day I was looking over my shoulder. And I just knew some dude I was in Greenhaven with, some dude I was in Greenwood was going to walk through the doors and say, yo, bro, what's good? And I was going to get fired. And I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep. So he said, listen, I'm going to try to help you get a job, and I'm going to get you connected to somebody you could tell your story to. So he gets me this interview with a guy that was working at the Jewish board. This is my first entree with the Jewish board, and you know him. I'm not going to say his name. So I go on, and I'm excited because I want to tell my truth. I don't want to live a lie, right? I've been there, done that. I want to be able to just live without looking over my shoulder, and I want a chance to compete and do the work. So I remember I went into this interview with this guy, and he was like, my friend was like, you want to work for the Jewish board because it's a good organization. Let's get you in the door. I go in, I meet with him, and I pour my heart out. I tell him my whole story. And he sits there, he's looking at me. We spent a whole hour in the interview. And at the end of it, he says, you know what, I'm gonna see what I can do. And I'm excited. I remember, I forget, I walked out the door. I felt like an anvil was lifted off my shoulders because I was able to just be honest. I didn't have to worry. And all I want to do is do the work. And I'm like, I remember I called Winslow and I said, this is blah, blah, blah. And he says to me, all right, let's see. And I'm waiting for the call. I don't get a call. No one calls me back. And then finally Winslow calls me because he knew the guy, because I was his friend. He says, you're not going to get the job. And I was kind of devastated because I had, you think one thing and it's not what it was. And basically what happened was this guy felt that even though I had demonstrated skill, and I was actually working, right? This would have been a second job. He didn't feel like I showed enough contrition. I don't even want to describe, I get angry thinking about that right now. But So I say that to say that I was done with the Jewish board. So he said to me, he said, listen, I got one more thing. I want you to meet somebody. I want you to meet Mary. I'm like, I don't want to meet no Mary. I don't care who that is. I'm not dealing with that. He said, please, come on, man. And the only thing that kept me on course was that he got me this far. So I'm like, you know what? But I didn't want to go through that again. So he sets up this meeting with Mary Pennegreen. I didn't know who Mary was. So I go to meet her down at the office on 57th Street. I walk in. I'm going to give it another try on the strength of Winslow. And I never forget, I walk into her office, a therapist's office. I'm like, what is this? Big red couch. And I give this thing a try again. And I tell her the story. And I never forget, she just sat there, listened, And, like usually when I tell people stuff, they're like, you could see people have a hard time hiding the reaction. And I tell her the story. And you know what the first thing she said to me after I laid all this stuff on her? You ever think about getting a therapist? Blew me away. I'm like, so she must have saw my reaction, because even though I was doing the work at CUCS, it wasn't like, she hit a nerve, because then I started blubbering around. Oh, that's blah, 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 blah. Cut me right off. Listen, how are you going to do the work if you don't believe in it for yourself? So it was nothing about prison. It was nothing about jail. It was like, you ever think about getting a therapist? And I never forget, I was moved by that conversation because there was a dissonance there, right? It's like when you do therapy with somebody and you hit somebody with something that they just cannot, there's this sort of internal where you recognize that there's something that's not right. So she said, listen, here's what we can do. If you stay in touch with me, I was going to grad school at the time. I hope you get a job when you get finished. And I want to share this story because this is what the work is, right? It is what you do above the board in your day-to-day. So when I graduated, I got out. I never forget, she sent me an application. She said, put the truth down. And I imagine that this is how it went, right? I sent it back to her, and I imagine that she took that application, whatever currency she had in her role at the Jewish board, which was essentially a white organization, she walked that right up to the HR head, not the regular generalist. And whatever she said, I don't know if I ever asked her what the conversation was. She put some currency on the line to get me an interview. And it blew me away. So I got called for an interview. First time in my life for a job I didn't have to lie about my history with, and that I can go in and compete. That was so critical to me because I felt like she didn't know me. She took a risk in maybe seeing something in me and opening that door for me in a way that created opportunities that I wouldn't be here today without that. But this is the work. It's the Winslows. It's the Eddie Ellises. It's the Mary Penegreens, right? It's like the Underground Railroad of support that you can provide for people when you are oriented this way and you believe in social justice and you have capacity to do the work and to connect and engage with people. So there's always ways that you can help, and you never know how the helping hands of this work will open up doors for people. And I stayed at the Jewish board for 12 years under her guidance, under her support, sometimes tough love, growing. She said, you need to become a good social worker. I went out and got a therapist. I entered therapy, and it made me a better person. It made me a better man, and grew because of that experience. Helping hands, opening doors. As many barriers as we all are faced with and we all have to deal with, there are always these helping hands, and that is the power of this work. And I didn't say this right, but I've been saying this in my head, but I want to say this right. Every intervention isn't the right one, but the right intervention is everything. And even as you work with people and you engage in this work, people's lives don't play out on the vacuum. And there are going to be a lot of times where we are not going to have the kind of change that we want, but that's more about us than it is about the people. People are ready when they're ready. You've just got to believe and trust that there are people out there who will help you. And the only thing that you have to do when you get in a position to do it is do the same thing. Pay it forward. Thank you for the time. It's been a pleasure.